my soul starts to linger. It's home, I know. If you catch me daydreaming now and forever, thoughts are carrying me along to that place we call home. Down that long road, throughout life we roam. Wherever I go, to that place I know it'll always be home, home to me.
I'll play the first few notes, then we'll sing the national anthem. Ready, sing.
Something you wouldn't expect in the heart of Metro Toronto. Here in East York, a one-room schoolhouse isn't the only element of surprise. Quiet, wooded valleys, a beekeeper, the oldest operating paper mill in Canada. I'm Harvey Kirk. In this episode of Sketches of Our Town, we'll look at some of the fascinating highlights of this neighborhood, Canada's only remaining borough. If only he could see it now. To encourage new settlements in the neighborhood of York, John Graves Simcoe, governor in 1796, ordered that one pair of millstones be issued for a grist mill to be built on the Don River. This decision was the impetus for what would develop into present-day East York. Today's East York is proud of its reputation as a neighborhood community. What you will find is a self-respecting working class and professional community, the backbone of the borough. Many municipalities were once classified as boroughs, and most opted, sooner or later, to become cities. The residents of East York, however, decided to keep their borough status. It was synonymous with small-town neighborliness. One of East York's earliest industries, papermaking, is still an ongoing tradition in the Don Valley. Once, paper was made in several mills along the lower reaches of the Don River. Today, only one mill remains in operation. Howard Smith was resident manager for many years. Howard, every day there are thousands and thousands of cars pass by on the Don Valley Parkway right out there, but I don't think many of the drivers realize that down here in the valley is an active paper mill making paper.
Well, there certainly is. This mill has been here since 1826, which is a long, long time ago.
Long time. This must have been out in the boondocks at that time, far out in the country.
Oh, I think so. There is some history which Charles Soriol probably knows about the landscape around here before then. But from our point of view, incidentally, this is the oldest paper mill in Canada.
Now operated by Domtar, The mill is a landmark. During the 1850s, paper manufacturing grew at an enormous rate. The population of Toronto was over 30,000, and this, coupled with improved literacy, meant an increased appetite for books, newspapers, and printed material. In Ontario alone, 172 newspapers were published. To keep up with the demand, 3 mills along the Don River operated round the clock. In the 1800s, the process had not yet been invented for using wood as a raw source for papermaking.
And they were making paper in those days out of rags, because there wasn't any commercial, at least in this part of the country, pulp.
What kind of rag? What do you mean rags? Just
Linen,
cloth?
old shirts and linens of some bed linen, anything tall. As a matter of fact, as recently as in the middle 50s, we were still buying rags from Russia.
Is that right?
Yeah, which were, the Russians wear linen boots. And these were old second-hand linen boots that came by ship and carload, and it was something to behold when you opened the door of that freight car. Right.
Now, there's an interesting story all in itself. We imported used boots
From Russia.
to make Canadian paper.
That's right.
Another fact of history, on the lighter side, the Don River Valley, the borough's dominant physical feature. Today, it is a major transportation route with miles of parkland along its course. Charles Soriol has had a love affair with the Don and its tributaries for over 60 years. As a conservationist and historian, he, more than anyone else, has helped save the valley.
I started first around about 1927. I saw there was a great deal in these valleys that should be preserved, and set out on a one-man campaign to sell the idea of keeping them in greenbelt condition. And of course, the years went by, the threats increased, and eventually we really had to fight very hard to preserve them, principally through the Don Valley Conservation Association. This was quite a place in its day. It was, actually, there was a village here. And I remember a great deal of it because the stables and some of the houses were here when I first came out about the mid-20s. I know the forks of the Don very well, and I acquired some property down here, run-down cottage, and worked on it, and eventually built up a very nice little estate. And I just suppose that I could have loved any valley, but this one happened to be near, and I loved this particularly well, and I spent a lot of time here trapping up and down. I've been keeping bees, they've been keeping me in part for 40 years. And the hives produce some very fine qualities of honey. My interest in bees is not so much honey, it is nectar-bearing plants. I study nectar-bearing plants. Any plant that will produce nectar or pollen is of great interest to me. That's a chrysanthemum that looks like an aster, and I wish I had an acre of it. because we're almost on November the 1st, and this thing is full of bees this morning, and it shows that they can gather pollen from it at this late date. And it's very necessary to have plants that extend long into fall, because this really helps the bees in building up their supplies. But I'm just fascinated the way they're working this morning. It's just a lovely sight. But what's interesting about it is all this takes place about 2 miles from the, let's say, King and Youngsters farm.
Today, the Don Valley Parkway runs through the heart of East York. To the west of the expressway is a corner of the borough that was once called the town of Leeside. That is a reminder of Leeside's beginnings. It was the CPR that named the town after James Lee, the first settler. And it was the CNR back in 1912 that had plans to make Leeside into a great rail center. The First World War interrupted these plans, though they did establish repair yards. With the opening of Canada Wire and Cable Company during the war, Leeside became Canada's first planned industrial park. Next to the plant was an airfield built to train pilots for overseas. Located south of present-day Eglinton Avenue, it operated until the late 1920s as home of the Toronto Flying Club, Canada's first private flying club. In the summer of 1918, the airfield made Canadian aviation history. Brian Peck flew from Montreal to Leeside with the first letters ever sent by airmail in Canada. Not mentioned in his cargo list, 12 cases of whiskey smuggled into Prohibition, Ontario. Like most parts of the community, Leeside, despite being surrounded by Metro Toronto, still retains a small-town feeling. It's a friendly place where everyone seems to know one another. The quaintness, familiar faces, the daily activity found here create that special atmosphere. And as in any other town, there is a main street. Bayview Avenue keeps the tradition of small businesses alive. Many of the shops have been in operation for decades. Bedoli's has been on Bayview for 50 years. Today, the store is run by brothers, Salvatore and Dominic.
Running the business here in Leeside is very easy because the people are also friendly and very well to get along with.
We know a lot of our customers by name. You know, we joke around with them, which it helps a lot. If something that's expensive, we can explain to them why it is expensive. East York is a small community, and it's we really get to know the people, because most of the stores are very friendly, and about 80% of them are family owned, so everybody knows everybody, and they know they can go in there and have a little talk and just not in and out very fast.
The neighborhood of Leeside has a character all of its own. It is an integral part of the borough, and as sister to the Don Valley, is an important member of the East York family. In the heart of East York, this century schoolhouse is a replica of a one-room school at the turn of the century. It gives children a chance to experience what school was like in the borough once upon a time. Principal Ron Brownsberger is a descendant of one of the pioneer families. The children come for a full day of lessons. Arithmetic, it seems, was just as difficult back then.
I thoroughly enjoy the job because I find that, first of all, the students come entirely keen to participate. I do not have reluctant students come into this classroom. It's really super. And I can see from 9:30 through to 2:30 in a typical day that children have been able to pick up certainly a lot of what used to go on in the old schools.
Sounds from the past are everywhere. The old school bell the children hear when they arrive came from the area's first school. And a melody on the pump organ harkens to simpler times. Set back from the busy intersection of Peep and O'Connor, this cemetery plot is a lasting reminder of a powerful family dynasty that was once synonymous with industry and wealth in East York's early days. The Taylors settled at the forks of the Don River in 1831. They began with 82 acres and eventually amassed huge land holdings, grist and saw and paper mills, and a massive brick-making plant. John Taylor, the eldest of 3 sons, was the key player.
He was a bit of an inventor, and he was obviously an astute businessman, and he met George Brown of the Globe newspaper, and George Brown was looking for newsprint.
Author and historian Anne Guthrie is related to the Taylor family.
And persuaded John Taylor to start a paper mill at the forks of the Don. And that really was the beginning of the paper mills in the valley. At the same time, John was also one of the founders of one of the first directors of the Bank of Commerce. So it's indicative of his standing in the business community. And this is particularly interesting because when the Taylors moved to the Don Valley, they were listed as yeomen. And in 40 years, they had become gentlemen, which was quite a change in their status that time. This was a wonderful time. In East York, the 3 Taylors, all the Taylor sons, they built wonderful houses around at the top of Pottery Road, the top of Broadview Avenue, where O'Connor meets it. There was one farther to the east on O'Connor Drive called Four Oaks Gate, which was a splendid house. And they lived very well in Victorian splendor, these massive houses and many children and horses and servants, and it was a very splendid life.
The Taylor empire included Todmorden, a complex of mills and a brewery. East York's oldest industrial site, dating back to 1795, today it houses a cultural center and museum. Todmorden Village was first settled by the mill owners and their families. Housing for their employees was built at the top of Pottery Road, along today's Broadview Avenue.
Todmorden was called a village by the local inhabitants about the turn of the century, but it never really was a formal village in the government sense. The name came from Yorkshire, where the original settlers, the Hellawells and the Eastwoods, came from, and they called it after their place of origin. In the 1900s, which perhaps is the best time to picture it, it was a strip of houses along a dirt road. The inhabitants all knew each other. They went to a local store, Bader's local store, and it was great fun. You can picture them going up and down in their horses and carriages and the sleighs in the wintertime.
From the seat of industry in the valley, East York has grown into a community that over 100,000 people call home. A quality of the area comes from people who care. True Davidson, the borough's first mayor, was one of these. She spent 24 years in politics, and although she earned a reputation as an outspoken and hard-headed politician, her soft heart and caring made her their champion. Standing today is this reminder of the industry of men and women that contributed so much to the growth of East York. Bricks and pipelines alone do not build a good life. This is done by people. Perhaps the late True Davidson had the pioneer families in mind when she said that. But here, at Todmorden Mills, you can feel the richness, the uniqueness of this community. That is their legacy. I'm Harvey Kirk.